Good morning, church. As Heather said, my name is Mark. I'm one of the pastors here. Every week when I have the honor of preaching, I have to ask myself, is this the day that I go so long that people start complaining? So buckle up, everyone, because who knows where the Lord will take us this morning. We have been going through a series called He Is, where we're looking at either names or attributes of God and understanding who God is. Because when we understand who God is, then I can know who I was made to be. The first week we talked about God as creator. Then we talked about how God is with us. And last week Pastor Heather preached on how God is our provider, the God who meets the big things and the little things. And today we are going to be exploring the fact that Jesus is King. But before we go there, I have a question for all of us this morning. If you can remember to when you were in your younger years, what was your dream spouse? You had this idea of my dream husband or my dream wife. Maybe it was, I want them to be kind. Or maybe you were like myself and you're like, I have zero ability to cook, and so I need to meet someone who is able to make food so I don't starve myself to death. Maybe you're looking for chiseled abs and a nice jaw. Maybe you're looking for someone who is good with kids, someone who loves Jesus. I want a wife like that, or I want a husband like that. I think we all have these pictures of a partner for ourselves that fits certain categories. And it's as much about the things that I lack, of I need someone who's going to fit the things that I'm weak in, as much as the things that I desire, of these attributes of like, I think this would be a good person to spend my life with. And today my title is, I want a king like that. Because when we think about having a king, in the same way that we can think about these attributes and qualities of a person we want to spend our life with, if I'm going to follow someone, if I'm going to dedicate my life to someone, it has to be someone I actually want to follow. It has to be someone that I actually want to submit my life to. So today, as we explore this idea of kingship, it's important for us to recognize that I need to know what I need. I need to know what kind of king I want, what kind of king I need. And beyond that, we in the 21st century, and especially in America, have to push back against culture a little bit. Our entire country was built on, we don't need kings anymore. And so I need to retrain the way that I think, so that when I hear the word king, I don't say, well, we don't do that anymore. We say, well, show me a king that I actually want. So we've been walking through the entire Bible in one Sunday morning. So buckle up, everyone, because we are going to start where we always do, at the beginning. Genesis 1, God creates the heavens and the earth. He makes the entire planet and everything on it, and then he makes people. And in Genesis 1, starting in verse 26, God talks about the reasoning behind the people. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, the birds of the air, over the livestock, and all the wild animals, over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So in the beginning, we see that humanity is tasked with being the kings of the earth. God is the king of everything. God is the creator who established order, and then he makes people like you and me and says, you rule what I just made. Rule over all the plants. Rule over all of the things that live and breathe. It's your responsibility. And so we start with a king and a queen in a garden. ruling over what God has made for them. But the story doesn't go well, as then Satan comes along and tries to throw a little mischief in and says, but did God really say all these rules matter? Did God really say you'll die if you eat of this certain tree? And what happens is people hand over their kingly authority that they have been granted by God. Because kingship and authority only matters based on who gave it to you. And so humanity has been given it by God. They are in charge. But what do? Instead of listening to God, the one that gave them all the authority, they listen to someone else. And by disobeying God and listening to Satan, they say Satan is of higher authority than God. And they hand over the authority of the earth to Satan. So we went from king regents being in charge of what God gave to handing over that authority to the enemy. I don't want a king like that. I don't want a king who's going to mess it up quite quickly. But God had a plan. And so later on, he chooses a man named Abram, and we see in Genesis chapter 17, he changes his name to Abraham and gives him a little bit more details about what God's plan looks like. How are we going to get a good king back in the throne? God tells Abraham, no longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you the father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. God takes a nobody named Abram and says, I will give you a new name. I will make descendants come from you. And not only is it just, hey, you're going to be kind of important, nations will be born from you, and kings are going to come from your lineage. I don't think any kings are going to come from my lineage. I look at my children, and no offense to them, I'd be very surprised if the next president of the United States comes from our family. It could happen. I'm not taking that away from them. But for God to call the shots, to tell Abraham, important people are going to come from you. I don't think Abraham fully understood God's plan for humanity. Years later, Abraham's grandson Jacob is prophesying over his children and his grandchildren. They're about to enter into Egypt, and he wants them to know as he passes on that God has good things in store for them. In Genesis 49, he's prophesying over his son Judah. And he says, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. So Jacob is an old man at this point, and everyone wants to bless their kids and say, hey, I hope you have a good life when I'm gone. But Jacob is different. The words that he says to his son Judah is echoing what was told to Abraham, kings will come from you. But Jacob puts a little bit bigger of a twist on it and says, there is going to be one that comes from you, that the scepter truly belongs to, and all of the nations are going to come and bow down to him. Our idea of the king that we need is not just generic king, but is going to come from this line of Judah. And so years pass. The Israelites are in slavery in Egypt. They're rescued by Moses. They're brought out of Egypt. There's the parting of the Red Sea. All of this crazy stuff happens. God brings them into the promised land. And there's this period of time known as Judges when it says that everything did whatever they wanted to do because there wasn't anyone to tell them otherwise. And one of the major end points of the book of Judges is it was this way because we didn't have a king. If we had a king, everybody wouldn't have gone off the deep end. We need a good king who is going to lead us in the ways of God. And so we get to a young man named David. And David is probably most famous for being the guy who is a giant slayer. He goes to battle against a giant named Goliath, a huge towering man, and defeats him. And after this happens, the current king of Israel, Saul, travels back to the capital city and people are singing praises about their soldiers. And it says in 1 Samuel 18 that the women came out and were dancing and singing and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David has slain his tens of thousands. Remember, at this time, David is probably a teenager. Imagine you are the king of your nation, and they're like, oh, our king is great. He's killed a lot of people. And this teenager little boy has killed 10 times as many. Obviously, he hasn't, but what he has done has put David in this position of people being like, wow, let's watch this kid, because something great might become of him. And my natural reaction is to want a king like that. I want the king that everyone is going to say is the best. The king that comes through and slays his 10,000s. That nothing stands in this king's way. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, David, years later, becomes king. He is the great king that everyone has been hoping would be. It's under David that all of the promises of God are starting to come to fruition. They have the promised land. The borders are farther than ever before. All of the blessings of God are coming upon the people. But David isn't that perfect king that everyone needed. David has his own share of failings. But God comes to David and he says, David, when your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you. Your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. A few weeks ago, we talked about how God is with us. And we saw that in the building of the temple and God's presence residing amongst his people. And David's idea of what God promised here was probably like, oh, my son is going to build a temple, the house for God's name, and God will establish my lineage forever. But what God was also promising is there would be that one king, this king that everyone has been waiting for. And through that king, the lineage of David would be forever. There would be a king in Israel forever. And the reality is that I want a king that makes things right. Everything that we saw at the beginning of time is now broken, and we're trying to get back to the way that it was. And we get glimpses in Abraham and Moses and the children of Israel and David, but no one's solving humanity's problem. No one is making it right. We have a good leader, but I'm not sure if we have that king that we want. Continuing on, David writes a song. And in this song, some people at first were like, is David talking about himself? But there's something further that happens here. Psalm 2, verse 1, why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up and the rulers band together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their chains and throw off their shackles. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. He rebukes them in his anger, and he terrifies them in his wrath, saying, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with a rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. Therefore, you kings, be wise. Be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and celebrate his rule with trembling. Kiss his son, or he will be angry with you, and your way will lead to destruction. For his wrath can flare up in a moment, but blessed are all who take refuge in him. David writes this psalm, and some people are like, is this about him or is this about someone else? Because David is talking about the Lord's anointed. And the Lord's anointed, God speaks to him and says, you are my son, today I have become your father. And so David peels back the layers a little bit and reveals to us that the king that we long for is the Lord's anointed. Those words translated into Hebrew mean Messiah, anointed one. Those words translated into Greek mean Christ, the anointed one. So this Messiah, this Christ that we long for, will also be the Son of God. Now, people try to recognize from this verse, from this chapter of Psalms, that I think the Son of God is just sort of more like an adoption thing. But we're going to see that God's idea of Son of God was a little bit different than our idea. And so I want a king that is described in here, of the king that is like, hey, if anyone tries to oppose me, I'm going to shut this down. But if you come to me, if you take refuge in me, you will be blessed. I say yes, please, to a king like that. But then there's some confusing parts of the Old Testament that throw stuff in that I'm not sure if I want. Isaiah chapter 49, the prophet Isaiah is speaking and starts talking about this suffering servant. And Isaiah says that God says, it's too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Israel and bring back the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept. I also will make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth. This is what the Lord says, the Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, to him who was despised and abhorred by the nation, to the servant of rulers, kings will see you and stand up. Princes will see you and bow down, because of the Lord who is faithful, the Holy One of Israel who has chosen you. So we have this suffering servant, and I don't want a king like that. I don't want the king that's going to be despised and rejected, abhorred by the nations. That's not something I'm looking for. I'm looking for the king like David, who slayed tens of thousands. I'm looking for the guy who never loses. And that's why a lot of people took these passages and separated them and said this suffering servant is different than the Messiah. The anointed one is the victorious ruler. This suffering servant, I'm not really sure how he plays in. Hundreds of years pass and God is dealing with his people. And then a man named Jesus of Nazareth arrives on the scene. He fulfills these prophecies about the Messiah, the anointed one, the Son of God. He has God's power to restore broken things. But the religious leaders don't like him. They don't like what he stands for, how he is reinterpreting things. And Jesus, today is Palm Sunday, the day that we remember when Jesus sat on a baby donkey and rode into Jerusalem to the praises of people. And that was the fulfillment of one of the prophecies, because to ride in on a donkey was not very king-like. You expect the king to ride in on this white stallion and rides in with his army and is like, we're going to take over Jerusalem. We're going to kick out the Roman Empire. We're going to start something new. But to ride in on a donkey, and a baby donkey as well, was a sign of peace. I come in the name of the Lord. I come in the name of Yahweh to bring his peace, his grace, and his mercy to this nation. And so when Jesus rides in on this donkey, people are thinking, the king has returned. This is the descendant of David we've been waiting for. This is the one who will take back authority from Satan that we lost in the garden. Things are going to be different. But the religious leaders say, nope, not about that. He claims to be God, which is blasphemous, and he must die by being handed over to the Romans. So we're going to camp out for a little bit in John 18. It says that Pilate, the Roman governor, Jesus was brought before this Roman governor because the religious leaders did not have the right to execute Jesus. And so they bring him before Pilate and say, this man has done wrong. You need to execute him. So we pick up in verse 33. Pilate, the governor, went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus to him, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replies, "Is that your idea, or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and the chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king, and in fact, the reason I was born and came into this world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. And with this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release someone out at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." And now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Pilate's response to Jesus is, "Are you a king?" Jesus is like, "Did you figure that out yourself, or did someone tell you?" And he's like, "Look at me. Do I look like one of you? No, I'm not from this country. I don't get all your religious background information. It means nothing to me. I just want cold, hard facts." Jesus describes to him, "My kingdom is actually from another place," which breaks Pilate a little bit of like, what do you mean? Like, you claim to be the king of the Jews, you claim to be of these people, and yet you say that your kingdom is not from here, which means that your kingdom is here now, but did not originate here. He's trying to figure all this out, goes out to the people and says, "Hey, I have a custom to release to you one of the prisoners. Who do you want? I can give you back this king of the Jews." And they say, "No, we want the other guy, Barabbas, this guy who led a revolt against Rome." The irony here is that that is what they wanted the Messiah to be. They wanted the Messiah to be a revolt starter, someone who would fight against Rome. But Barabbas was a murderer and everything that Jesus was not. And yet they called out, "We want that guy, not this Jesus." We continue on in chapter 19. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe, went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and they slapped him in the face. I'll actually pause there. The irony of this scene, of Jesus being crowned, a robe of royalty put on him, and then the abuse railed against him, is actually his coronation. The king that we would expect there to be trumpets, pomp and circumstance, a day set dedicated to raising him up. What does he get? He gets a crown of pain. He gets beaten. And this is his coronation. This is Jesus on display for the world. Here is your king. We continue on in verse 4. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." That's a good government leader. This guy's innocent, but you can go exact punishment if you see fit. The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. Does a 180, goes back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you?" What did we talk about at the beginning? Power and authority and kingship is only given by someone higher. And Jesus' response is, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." Skipping ahead a few verses, Pilate says, "Here is your king." But they shouted, "Take him away, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. Once again, skipping ahead more, Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross that Jesus was hung on. And it read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was close to the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek, the three major languages of the day. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write to the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." I want a king who's like no other. Because when I see this passage, and I see the kind of king that Jesus is, that is a king that I want. If you asked me if that was the king that I wanted at the beginning, I would have said no. But when I see what Jesus embodies, when I see what Jesus is striving for, I want a king like that. Because as Jesus is having to deal with all of this injustice, he is a king that is willing to die for his enemies. And I have never known any king on the face of this planet that was willing to die for the people that hated him, that was willing to die for the people that wanted him dead. I've never seen a king like that. And yet here is Jesus, beaten and abused, with power and authority that he could override everything that's happening to him. He says, "If I wanted to, my servants that are not from this place could come and set me free." And yet, when Pilate comes back and says, "Where do you come from? What are you a king of?" Jesus gives no reply. Jesus proved that he had the ultimate power and authority because after his death on the cross, he rose from the grave. So that Jesus' response is kind of like, if you think you have power and authority, what are you going to do? Kill me again? We tried that. It didn't work. I have all the power and authority because I am God. And so Jesus, in this moment where he is on trial, the irony of the moment, it is one of humanity's lowest points. You have a governor of the Roman Empire who are very big on laws and justice. Out of all the governments that existed in our human history, Rome is up there as far as most that cared about justice and upholding the law. And what does Pilate do? He throws it out the window. You look at the religious leaders, the people who were responsible to God for leading Israel and the nations back to him. And what is their response? "We have no king but Caesar." The same chief priests who are trying to get their people back to their king of God. Let their lips speak out. "We have no king but Caesar." Forget Yahweh. Forget his promised Messiah. We just need Caesar. It's at this lowest point that God shows what kind of king he is. That he dies on a cross so that we might be set free. Going to fast forward to the very end. The book of Revelation. chapter 5. John, one of Jesus' friends and disciples, is seeing a vision of eternity and heaven. And John sees in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside of it. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." And you expect to turn and look and see a mighty lion, but John sees a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by 4 living creatures and the elders. The lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent into all the earth. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. And they sang a new song, saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God people from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." Then I looked, and I heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands, 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice they were saying, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." And I won't judge the angels for that run-on sentence. And then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them, saying, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." The 4 living creatures said, "Amen," and the elders fell down and worshipped. Jesus is the Lamb that was slain. He is the Lion of the tribe of Judah that Jacob prophesied would be the one that the scepter would come between his feet and all the nations would praise him. And we expect to see this lion, but what we got is the lamb that we needed to make us right with God. And the reality, church, is that if Jesus is king, I need to bow down. Because he is worthy of it all. Because if he, from beginning to end, is, has been, and always will be our king, then I need to respond in kind. Because even though I come from a society that we're not about the king thing, I know that he is the king of everything. And I need to let my life be in submission to his will for me. His will for our world, his will for our future. Because Jesus is worthy of it all. And the reality, church, is that as we bow down, as we say, "You are king," we need to be like him as well. Because the reality is those of us that follow Jesus are called to reign with him. And I don't fully understand what that means, but that is a promise from God. What we just read in Revelation, God, you paid in your blood for a kingdom of priests who would reign on the earth with you. So if I am going to reign with this king that is like no other, I need to look like him too. So that I look at all the passages that we read, and I look at Jesus' response when he was abused and the victim of injustice. And I say, how can I be like Jesus? How can I be a king on this earth that whatever that looks like, people are going to say he represents God well? I don't want to be a representative like Adam and Eve who failed and turned away. I don't want to be a king like David who was praised but had some secrets in the shadows that were not good. I want to be like Jesus. I'd like to invite the worship team to come up. And Pastor Heather she's going to lead us in a time of communion. But if you have never knelt before the King, today is a good day. If you've said yes to Jesus, but you didn't really get what exactly that meant, today is a good day to bow your knee. If you'll pray with me. Jesus, you are the King. You are worthy of all glory and honor. You are God, and we are not. I thank you, Jesus, that even though you are King, you did not use that position to your own advantage to rule it over us, but you came down and you became one of us. You humbled yourself even to the point of dying on a cross so that we might see the example that you set and we might be leaders that are willing to lay our lives down for others, so that we would be willing to lay our lives down for you. So Jesus, I give you my life today. I give you my life because I know that you are trustworthy. I know that you are a good king. I know that you are a king who does not lose. I know that you are a king with a plan. God, that though government leaders may fail me in my lifetime, I know that I serve a king who is higher and greater and better in every way. So Jesus, I thank you for who you are and what you've done. May you be glorified today. Amen.